She arrived on a Saturday. She left a few hours later. And the man she visited never left at all. That single sequence of events, a woman arriving, a woman leaving, a man staying behind, set in motion the most consequential law enforcement operation in Mexican history. Before we go any further into what happened in those mountains on February 22nd, 2026, understand this. The story you are about to hear is not really a story about a raid. It is not a story about military firepower or government resources. It is a story about trust, about the one human vulnerability that 10 years of extraordinary operational discipline could not protect against. And it is a story about a woman whose identity both the Mexican and American governments have refused to confirm publicly to this day. What do you think really happened in those mountains? Drop your theory in the comments right now. This is the kind of case where your analysis matters, and this community takes these questions seriously. Picture the Tapalpa Country Club. Not a cartel compound in the way most people imagine one. Not a fortified compound with visible gun towers. This is an upscale residential development nestled inside the pine-covered mountains of Jalisco, approximately 90 kilometers south of Guadalajara. Steep terrain on every side, dense forest pushing up against the property lines, cooler air than the city below, colonial architecture, and the kind of place where families come for long weekends, the kind of place that looks, from the outside, like nothing significant is happening at all, which is precisely the point. On the morning of Friday, February 20th, 2026, a vehicle moved through Jalisco toward the mountains. Inside it, a woman and a man described by Mexico's Secretary of National Defense, General Ricardo Trevilla Trejo, in his official press conference as a trusted man, a male associate who had been transporting her. A Mexican military intelligence had been watching this associate. Not for days. For long enough that when this vehicle moved, analysts at a command center somewhere recognized what the movement meant. The glow of a monitor. A position marker updating in real time. Someone, at a desk far from those mountains, understanding immediately that a significant moment had arrived. The vehicle reached Tapalpa. The woman entered a cabin complex on the outskirts of the town, and the man who had driven her did not go in. He waited. And inside that compound, according to Mexican and American authorities, was the man the entire intelligence apparatus of two countries had been hunting for more than a decade. Nemesio Rubén Oseguera Cervantes, known to the world as El Mencho, founder and supreme leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel, the CJNG, carrying a $15 million bounty from the United States government, one of the highest monetary rewards ever designated for a criminal fugitive in history. She stayed. She spent the night. On Saturday, February 21st, she left the compound. El Mencho did not leave with her. He stayed behind with his security detail, a group of heavily armed personal guards whose sole purpose was keeping him alive. And the moment her vehicle pulled away from that compound and moved back toward the city, a 24-hour operational clock started ticking that he would not survive. Think about what that means for a moment. For over 10 years, one of the most powerful and best-resourced intelligence operations ever assembled had been hunting this man. The DEA, the CIA, U.S. Northern Command, the Mexican Army, the Mexican Navy, satellite surveillance, financial tracking, informant networks built over years, all of it. And the thing that finally broke the case open was not a technological breakthrough. And it was not a network penetration or a signals intercept or a financial trail. It was a Saturday visit. A woman driving to the mountains, a few hours, a departure. Now, before we go any deeper into who that woman was, what she knew, and what three very different theories say about whether she cooperated deliberately or was tracked without her knowledge. Understand the scale of what ended in those mountains. Because to understand why this woman's visit mattered so much, you have to understand why every other approach had failed for 10 consecutive years. Here is where this case starts to become something more than a headline. Because when you examine the confirmed intelligence timeline, specifically what General Travilla disclosed publicly and what multiple credible reporting organizations including CNN, CBS News, and Fortune have since verified, a detail emerges that changes the entire framework for understanding the operation. The woman who visited El Mencho on that Friday and Saturday was not simply identified through routine surveillance. According to General Trevilla's official statement, military investigators had specifically identified and were following the trusted male associate who transported her. Not her. Him. The person of investigative interest was the man who drove her, which means the question of whether she cooperated deliberately or was an unwitting participant in a surveillance operation targeting someone in her circle becomes far more complicated than the initial headlines suggested. Who was she? Who was he? And did she know that the man driving her to those mountains had already been identified by the most intensive manhunt in Mexican law enforcement history? That is the question that carries us forward. And it is a question that neither the Mexican government nor the American government has answered publicly, even now. If you want to follow this investigation all the way to its conclusion, the operation itself, the three competing theories, the intelligence methodology, and what the mountains of Jalisco tell us about how the most sophisticated fugitives are ultimately found. Subscribe to the Case Files Collective and hit that notification bell right now. Every week, this channel brings you serious, evidence-based investigations into the cases that actually matter. No sensationalism, no filler, just the facts, the forensics, and the hard questions. Hit subscribe, then stay with us. Because what comes next changes everything you think you know about how this operation actually worked. To understand why that Saturday visit mattered so much, you have to understand exactly who was sitting inside that mountain compound waiting for her to arrive. Nemesio Rubén Oseguera Cervantes was born on July 17, 1966, in the rural community of Culotitlan, in Aguililla, Michoacán, one of the most impoverished and isolated pockets of Western Mexico. No wealth, no connections, no formal education beyond 6th grade. He was born into a family of avocado farmers and dropped out of school in 6th grade. That is the foundation. So that is where the most powerful criminal organization in the Western Hemisphere began. In a dirt-poor farming community where the only visible future was the land beneath your feet. Court and prison records show he illegally traveled into the United States at least 3 times and attempted to build a drug trafficking operation when he was around 19 years old, living near San Francisco. He was not subtle about it. He was not careful enough. In 1994, the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California sentenced him to 3 years in prison for conspiracy to distribute heroin. He served the time. He was deported back to Mexico, and he came back with something prison time often accelerates in men with his particular kind of strategic intelligence, a sharper understanding of how law enforcement thinks, how surveillance operates, and precisely where the gaps are. For a time, he served as chief enforcer for the Mencho Cartel, before overseeing security and operational functions for the Sinaloa Cartel. He was learning, studying the architecture of criminal power from the inside. And when the Mencho Cartel splintered amid a power vacuum after its leader Oscar Nava Valencia was captured in 2009, Oseguera built the CJNG from those remnants, not inherited. Built from the wreckage of someone else's collapse. What he constructed over the following decade was, by any intelligence assessment, extraordinary in its scale. And the CJNG has been assessed to have the highest cocaine, heroin, and methamphetamine trafficking capacity in Mexico, and over recent years added fentanyl trafficking into the United States. The organization's reach extended across at least 28 Mexican states, with operational contacts in Colombia, Peru, Bolivia, throughout Central America, and across the United States. The group has contacts in over 40 countries, including the Americas, Australia, China, and Southeast Asia. According to the U.S. State Department, the United States took formal notice. Since 2017, Oseguera Cervantes had been indicted multiple times in U.S. federal court, most recently in April 2022, charged with conspiracy to manufacture and distribute methamphetamine, cocaine, and fentanyl for importation into the United States. In February 2025, Washington designated the CJNG a foreign terrorist organization and placed a $15 million reward on El Mencho's head. And the kind of number reserved for individuals the U.S. government considers genuinely destabilizing to regional security. Ask yourself this: how does a man with a 6th grade education, a criminal record in 2 countries, and no family money build an organization that the DEA, the CIA, U.S. Northern Command, and the entire Mexican military apparatus cannot locate for over a decade? The answer to that question is what makes the woman's Saturday visit the most significant intelligence event in a 10-year manhunt. And it starts with understanding exactly what El Mencho built to keep himself invisible, and why, after everything, it was not enough. Here is the question that defines this entire case. If 2 governments, the DEA, the CIA, U.S. Northern Command, and the entire Mexican military apparatus spent over a decade hunting one man, why couldn't they find him? And the answer is not luck. It is not corruption alone, though corruption was part of it. The answer is that El Mencho built something that intelligence professionals described, even after his death, as one of the most sophisticated personal security operations ever constructed around a single individual. Start with the most basic layer. He rarely allowed a phone near him because he feared a GPS signal might reveal his location. Not occasionally. Rarely. Ever. See, in an era where virtually every person on Earth carries a device that broadcasts their precise coordinates in real time, El Mencho understood that a phone was not a tool. It was a tracking beacon. So he eliminated it entirely. Physical couriers carried messages. Face-to-face communication happened only within a tightly controlled circle. The digital silence around him was nearly absolute. Then, there was the physical security layer. His system relied on high-powered weaponry, nearly 400 gunmen, bomb-delivering drones, and sometimes landmines. He moved with highly trained forces wherever he traveled, with a security apparatus modeled after military special forces teams. This was not a man surrounded by ordinary armed guards. This was a man who had constructed a private military unit whose sole operational purpose was keeping him alive and undetected. Outside his circle, few knew what he looked like, a detail confirmed by former FBI agent Arturo Fontes, who spent decades tracking senior figures in Mexican organized crime. He had evaded capture for more than a decade, shielded by a combination of sophisticated counterintelligence, territorial control, and systemic corruption. That third element, corruption, is the one that intelligence agencies can work around technically, but almost never fully neutralize. When local officials, regional law enforcement, and mid-level government contacts are embedded within the same network you are hunting, And every operational plan carries the risk of advance warning reaching the target before forces arrive. Rumors of his death surfaced years before his actual death. In February 2022, various reports in the Mexican press stated he had been eliminated in a CJNG confrontation with rivals. He was not. He was alive, directing operations, and the false report likely served a purpose, allowing him to go even quieter while the world briefly stopped looking. And he had also been rumored to suffer from serious kidney disease. Those reports were accurate. He was dependent on regular dialysis, a condition that severely limits where a person can go and how long they can stay there. His health was both a vulnerability and, paradoxically, a reason his movements were so constrained and predictable in ways authorities were only beginning to map. His entire family network was dismantled around him over 5 years of coordinated law enforcement action. His son, his wife, 2 brothers, his son-in-law, all taken into federal custody one by one. Each arrest tightened the circle. Each extradition removed another node from the network. And yet El Mencho himself remained untouchable. Mexican authorities never cracked the cartel's inner command network. What finally broke the case was not a technological breakthrough or a network penetration. It was something far older than any surveillance technology. It was a human opening, one personal connection, one trusted man who transported a woman through the mountains of Jalisco. And that single thread, pulled carefully over the right period of time, unraveled everything that a decade of extraordinary operational discipline had constructed. You have to ask yourself, if you had built that level of protection around your life, no phone, 400 armed guards, landmines, drones, couriers instead of calls, what would it take for you to feel safe enough to let someone in? What would that person have to mean to you? Because the answer to that question is the answer to everything that happened next. Every manhunt has a single moment where the years of dead ends finally stop. A moment where the intelligence picture shifts from fragmented and uncertain to concrete and actionable. For this operation, that moment arrived on February 20th, 2026. And it did not arrive the way most people assumed it would. It was not a communications intercept. It was not a financial trail. It was not a high-level informant inside the CJNG's command structure delivering organizational secrets. All the signals infrastructure in the world did not locate El Mencho. A tip about a romantic partner did. Specifically, it came from a man. A quiet, unremarkable figure in the broader story. The person General Trevilla described publicly at the February 23rd press conference only as a trusted man. On February 20th, through Central Military Intelligence work, a man of trust of one of El Mencho's romantic partners was located, who took her to a facility in the town of Tapalpa. Jalisco, Trevilla said. That sentence, delivered in the measured language of a military press conference, contains the entire architecture of the intelligence break. Here is what it tells us. Military investigators had been building a picture of El Mencho's personal network, not his operational command structure, but the human connections around the edges of his life. The people who moved in and out of proximity to him. The people he allowed access. And somewhere in that mapping process, and they identified this man, a trusted associate, someone whose role was to transport one of El Mencho's romantic partners to visit him. A driver, a courier, a bodyguard, someone so routine in his function that he may never have imagined he was the thread that would unravel everything. On February 20th, 2026, and surveillance data confirmed that the associate had transported the partner to a residence within the Tapalpa Country Club, an upscale gated residential development in the municipality of Tapalpa, Jalisco, where Oseguera was believed to be staying. The location itself was not unknown to authorities, and the site a vacation rental known as Cabañas La Loma, had been sanctioned by the U.S. Treasury in 2015 and again in 2017 for providing material assistance to the drug trafficking activities of the Jalisco Cartel. They had the address in their files for years. What they had never had until this moment was confirmation that El Mencho himself was inside it. The exact location was confirmed by very important additional information provided by U.S. intelligence. And that phrase, very important additional information, is deliberate institutional language. It signals that American intelligence assets, whether technical, human, or both, independently corroborated what Mexican military surveillance had already established. Two separate intelligence streams, both pointing to the same compound, both pointing to the same man inside it. Once the woman left after spending the night with El Mencho, Special Forces finalized their plans, having confirmed he was staying in the area with a security detail. To avoid arousing suspicion, the mission was primarily carried out by ground forces with limited air support from helicopters. Units from the Mexican Army and the National Guard established a ground cordon, while 6 helicopters and additional special forces stood by in states bordering Jalisco, positioned outside Jalisco entirely, specifically so that no unusual military concentration inside the state would reach the ears of anyone connected to the CJNG before forces were ready to move. This is what patience in intelligence work looks like. Not weeks, not months. A 48-hour window from confirmed tip to confirmed perimeter. Precise, controlled, and built entirely on one human connection. A trusted man who transported a woman through the mountains that a decade of electronic surveillance had never been able to replicate. But here is the detail that does not resolve cleanly. The woman's role remains officially unconfirmed by either government. The trusted man transported her. She visited. She left. And the question of what she knew, if anything, when she walked out of that compound on Saturday, is the question that neither Mexico City nor Washington has chosen to answer publicly. And that silence, deliberate and sustained, is itself a piece of evidence worth examining very carefully. February 21st, 2026. Saturday morning. The mountains above Tapalpa are quiet. Pine forests push up against the edges of the Tapalpa Country Club to a gated residential development where stone-faced cabins sit tucked between trees on steep terrain. From the outside, it looks exactly like what it is supposed to look like. A weekend retreat. A place families come to escape the noise of Guadalajara, 90 kilometers north. Nothing about the property signals what is happening inside it. The woman is already there. She arrived the previous day, Friday. See February 20th. Transported by the trusted associate military intelligence had been quietly tracking. She spent Friday night at the compound. Saturday, she is still present. And at a command center somewhere outside Jalisco, analysts are watching every data point coming in from the surveillance architecture that has been built around this location across the past 48 hours. This is the moment the entire operation balances on, not the raid itself. This moment. And because El Mencho's presence cannot be assumed, it has to be confirmed. Aerial surveillance spotted Oseguera Cervantes' inner circle openly carrying illegal high-caliber weapons, including rocket launchers and long guns. That visual confirmation from above is significant. The security posture of the guards, their positioning, the weapons they are carrying openly, the way they are moving around the property, communicates exactly what analysts need to know. This level of armed presence does not exist around an empty compound. It exists around one specific person. When the woman left on February 21st, her departure confirmed that El Mencho had stayed behind and gave the green light for final raid approval. That sentence, precise and clinical in the Small Wars Journal Operational Assessment, contains everything. She left. He stayed. And in that gap, in the space between her vehicle pulling away from the compound and disappearing down the mountain road, the operation became irreversible. On February 21st, she left the property, and information was obtained that El Mencho remained at the location, General Trevilla confirmed publicly at the February 23rd press conference. The language is careful, measured. He does not say how that information was obtained after her departure. He does not describe the surveillance method. How he states the outcome: she left, he stayed. The plan to proceed was authorized that day. Now think carefully about what you just heard. Her departure was not simply a logistical convenience that allowed authorities to act without her being present during the operation. Her departure was the confirmation event, the moment that removed the final variable from the intelligence picture. Before she left, the authorities had a high-confidence location but could not be certain El Mencho would remain stationary. After she left and confirmation came through that he had not left with her, the picture locked. A stationary, confirmed target inside a defined perimeter with a security detail whose weapons had already been visually identified from the air. Units from the Mexican Army and the National Guard established a ground cordon, while 6 helicopters and additional special forces stood by in states bordering Jalisco. 24 hours. That is the window between her departure on Saturday and the moment forces moved on Sunday morning. 24 hours that El Mencho spent inside that compound, unaware that the surveillance architecture built around one trusted man, one woman, and one Saturday visit had already closed around him completely. But here is where the account that both governments have presented publicly starts to leave a gap that has never been filled. If the departure of the woman was the confirmation event, the moment that locked the intelligence picture and authorized the operation, what exactly was she told, if anything, before she left that compound? Because the confirmed timeline places her departure and the intelligence confirmation in the same breath. And that precise alignment between her leaving and the green light being given is either the most consequential coincidence in this entire operation, or it is not a coincidence at all. February 22nd, 2026. Pre-dawn. The pine forests above Tapalpa are still dark. Cold mountain air. Silence across the narrow road leading to Cabañas La Loma, a cluster of 7 upscale stone cabins sitting on a steep hillside, tucked between trees so dense that anyone approaching along the single entry road can be seen from the compound long before they arrive. That long, narrow, bumpy road is the only way in, which is precisely why Mexican Special Forces did not use it. To maintain the element of surprise, the Mexican commandos approached from above in helicopters, supported by surveillance from U.S. Predator drones. 6 helicopters that had been pre-positioned in states bordering Jalisco overnight moved simultaneously. Ground units advanced on foot from multiple directions, establishing a perimeter around the property before the security detail inside could organize a coordinated response. Special forces, backed by the National Guard, military aircraft, and helicopters, sealed off the area before dawn on February 22nd. Inside the compound, the night before had looked nothing like a military target preparing for an assault. The raid reportedly followed an all-night party hosted by El Mencho. A bunch of green onions left half-charred on the grill outside one of the smaller cabins suggested the arrival of the commandos coincided with a carne asada cookout. Trampolines on the lawn. A basketball court. Children's drawings left on notebook pages inside the main house. A fighting roosters in cages along the entry road, a detail consistent with El Mencho's known nickname, El Señor de los Gallos. The most wanted man in Mexico had spent his last free night in the mountains hosting a gathering. When forces announced their presence, the security detail responded immediately. Cartel gunmen opened fire as soldiers advanced. Security forces returned fire, with several CJNG operatives fatally wounded in the confrontation. The raid left the 59-year-old leader of the Jalisco New Generation Cartel dead, following an hours-long engagement with his bodyguards. Amid the chaos of the initial confrontation, El Mencho and members of his inner circle broke from the main compound. Oseguera Cervantes and his close circle fled into a nearby wooded area. After soldiers located them hidden among the brush, cartel suspects opened fire on the troops. Military personnel then wounded El Mencho and two of his escorts. The forest offered concealment, but not escape. The perimeter held. Pursuit teams tracked all three through the undergrowth: steep terrain, limited visibility, dense pine cover. There was nowhere further to go. Military medics determined that Oseguera Cervantes and his two escorts were in critical condition and required immediate evacuation by helicopter. All three were airlifted toward Mexico City. None of the three survived transport. Oseguera's body arrived at Mexico City International Airport on February 22nd, before being taken under heavy military security to the Specialized Prosecutor's Office for Organized Crime, FEMDO, where forensic identification was conducted. Mexican authorities confirmed that the operation, conducted with U.S. intelligence assistance, resulted in 6 CJNG operatives fatally wounded in addition to Oseguera, and left 3 soldiers injured. The $15 million manhunt was over. It ended not in a dramatic confrontation at a command center or a border crossing, but in a pine forest above a mountain town, at dawn on a Sunday morning, because a woman had visited on Saturday, and he had stayed behind. But while forces were still securing the compound and the helicopters were still in the air, something was already happening across 20 Mexican states that would demonstrate with absolute clarity that ending El Mencho had not ended the CJNG. The announcement had barely cleared the airwaves. El Mencho was dead. And within hours, 20 Mexican states responded as if someone had flipped a single switch simultaneously across the entire country. That is not a figure of speech. It is a description of organizational capability. Numerous road blockades were established by CJNG members using hijacked cargo trucks, buses, and private vehicles set on fire to obstruct traffic. Security forces identified approximately 250 roadblocks nationwide, with incidents reported in Jalisco and 19 other states. 250 blockades, 20 states, coordinated, simultaneous, within hours of a single operational event. That is not spontaneous rage. That is a pre-built response architecture that had been sitting dormant, waiting for exactly this trigger. Jalisco Governor Pablo Lemus Navarro activated a Code Red, the state's highest security emergency protocol, and urged residents to remain in their homes until the situation was under control. Guadalajara, a metropolitan area of 5 million people and a scheduled host city for the 2026 FIFA World Cup just months away, became, in the words of NBC News, a ghost town. People sprinting through airport terminals, smoke visible above the tourist district of Puerto Vallarta. Southwest, Alaska, on Delta and Air Canada all canceled or suspended flights into Puerto Vallarta and Guadalajara, as roadblocks made ground access to airports impossible. Over 1,000 travelers were stranded. The port of Manzanillo was temporarily closed. The retaliation was directed, at least in part, by Hugo Cesar Macias Ureña, known as El Tuli, El Mencho's key operational lieutenant in Jalisco. A bounty system offering 20,000 Mexican pesos for each soldier fatally wounded was reportedly directed through his network. This detail is important. It tells you that the retaliation was not leaderless. It was commanded. There was a specific individual directing the response, activating pre-positioned cells, and offering financial incentives to escalate the violence against security forces. And at least 25 members of Mexico's National Guard were fatally wounded in coordinated incidents across Jalisco and neighboring states, according to Mexico's Security Secretary, Omar Garcia Harfuch. More than 70 incidents were reported in 23 municipalities in Guanajuato alone, among them 60 arson attacks. 50 Banco del Bienestar branches and more than 200 OXXO stores sustained damage. During the retaliatory incidents, a substantial wave of disinformation spread across social media. Widely shared false claims included reports that the Guadalajara International Airport had been taken over, that tourists had been taken hostage, and that President Claudia Sheinbaum had been evacuated to a naval vessel. The disinformation was itself a tactical weapon, amplifying fear, disrupting civil response, and making it harder for authorities to communicate accurate information to the public in real time. Psychological pressure running parallel to the physical disruption on the ground. And the scale of coordinated disruption surprised even the Mexican government, while reinforcing sentiment within Washington that Mexico struggles to manage its own domestic security challenges. Former DEA Chief of International Operations Mike Vigil described the cartel's response as designed to project a single message: the organization survives its founder. The retaliation was not grief, it was a demonstration. Directed at the Mexican government, at rival criminal organizations watching from every direction, and at anyone within the CJNG's own structure who might interpret El Mencho's death as permission to defect. The message was clear: the organization was still standing, but the man who had built it and held it together for 15 years was gone. And what happens to an organization of this size and complexity when the single figure who commanded its loyalty, directed its strategy, and made its most consequential decisions no longer exists? That is the question that no amount of roadblocks or coordinated retaliation can answer. That question lives in a succession battle that was already beginning before the helicopters carrying El Mencho even reached Mexico City. Her name is Guadalupe Moreno Carrillo, and both governments have chosen not to confirm it publicly. But that gap between what investigative reporting has established and what official channels have formally acknowledged is itself the first piece of evidence you need to hold on to as you examine what she actually knew about what her Saturday visit would set in motion. Available documents only identify her as a romantic partner and as a figure in the cartel's organizational chart up to 2022, without establishing that she participated in his location deliberately. Whether she was an unwitting lead or something more remains an open and unresolved question. Guadalupe Moreno Carrillo was first publicly identified in October 2022, when leaked documents from Mexico's Defense Secretariat, exposed during the massive Guacamaya Leaks hack, named her as the presumed romantic partner of Oseguera Cervantes. The relationship reportedly began after the second arrest of his wife, Rosalinda González Valencia, in November 2021. Beyond her personal relationship with El Mencho, Guadalupe Moreno Carrillo is listed in Sedena documents within a section describing regional coordinators and plaza bosses of the CJNG in Jalisco. The documents did not specify her precise role or rank, but her presence in that section of the organizational chart tells you something significant. She was not simply a private individual who happened to know someone. She was embedded, at least structurally, within the operational picture that military intelligence had been building for years. Military intelligence had photographs of her and maintained close surveillance of properties where she lived in Zapopan and Puerto Vallarta. That detail reframes the entire timeline. This was not a surveillance operation that began in February 2026, when the trusted associate transported her to Tapalpa. Your authorities had been watching her properties, plural, for an extended period before that vehicle moved through the mountains. The intelligence picture around Guadalupe Moreno Carrillo had been accumulating quietly, patiently, for months or possibly years before February 20th arrived. Now consider three distinct frameworks for understanding what she knew and what role she played. Each is supported by confirmed evidence. Each leads to a different conclusion about the woman at the center of this operation. The first framework holds that she cooperated deliberately, that at some point in the months preceding February 2026, Mexican military intelligence, with U.S. support, made contact with her either directly or through intermediaries. That she was presented with a choice: the $15 million bounty designated by the United States government, or immunity from prosecution given her documented presence in the CJNG's organizational structure, or protection from an organization that had already demonstrated it would eliminate anyone it considered a threat. In this framework, her visit to Tapalpa on February 20th and 21st was not a personal visit. It was an intelligence operation with a specific purpose: confirm his location, confirm his presence, confirm his intention to remain and leave before forces moved. On the timing of her departure, the precision of the operational window that followed, and the pre-positioned forces already staged in bordering states all point toward coordination rather than coincidence. Ask yourself, if you were a woman documented in cartel organizational charts, under long-term surveillance, with your properties monitored and your movements tracked, and the most powerful military intelligence apparatus in Mexico's history came to you with an offer, what would you do? Here's the second framework holds that she knew nothing, that she traveled to Tapalpa for exactly what the visit appeared to be: a private meeting with someone she had been in a relationship with for approximately 3 years. Mexico's Attorney General's office currently considers Guadalupe Moreno Carrillo a fugitive, based on the likelihood that she lived alongside El Mencho during his years in hiding. If she were a cooperating protected witness, that fugitive designation would be operationally counterproductive. You do not designate a protected source as a fugitive. That designation suggests she is not under government protection, which in turn suggests she did not cooperate in a formally arranged intelligence agreement. In this framework, the trusted associate, the man who drove her, was the actual cooperating source, operating without her knowledge. On February 21st, the woman and her driver were intercepted by military personnel to confirm that El Mencho was still in one of the cabins. That interception, described matter-of-factly in La Sila Rota's reporting of General Trevilla's briefing, is a detail that does not appear in most headline coverage. Her vehicle was stopped. She was spoken to by military personnel on her way out. Whether that conversation was a routine confirmation or something more substantive is a question neither government has answered. The third framework sits in the space between the two and may be the most analytically honest position available, given what is confirmed. Authorities believe Guadalupe Moreno Carrillo accompanied El Mencho during his years living clandestinely across mountainous regions of Jalisco, Michoacán, and Colima. A woman who spent years moving through clandestine safe houses with one of the most hunted men in the world understands surveillance. She understands the risk embedded in every movement she makes. She may have suspected she was being tracked. She may have taken precautions. She may have been aware that someone in her circle, a driver, an associate, someone she trusted, had been turned by intelligence agencies without her knowledge. And she may have made a calculated decision that the visit would happen regardless. And because the alternative, permanently cutting contact with someone she had spent 3 years moving through the mountains with, carried its own set of consequences in a world where the CJNG does not forgive people who simply disappear from a leader's circle without explanation. In a nation shaped by cartel secrecy, any suggestion of intimacy feels like a weakness worthy of mythologizing. But this case is not mythology. It is intelligence methodology. And the methodology confirms one thing regardless of which theory is true. A single name kept coming up: Guadalupe Moreno Carrillo. And whether she led authorities to El Mencho deliberately, unknowingly, or somewhere in the complicated space between those two positions, the operational result was identical. She left, he stayed, and Sunday came. This is the part of the story that intelligence professionals rarely talk about publicly. But because it exposes something uncomfortable about the limits of technology, surveillance architecture, and even extraordinary operational discipline. Every major fugitive in modern history, every single one, was ultimately found not because of a technological breakthrough. They were found because of a human being they trusted. Hold that thought, because the pattern is too consistent to be coincidence. Pablo Escobar, the most wanted man in Colombia. He ran the most powerful criminal organization the Western Hemisphere had ever seen before El Mencho's CJNG surpassed it. He evaded Colombian and American authorities for years through a combination of bribery, popular support, and relentless movement between safe houses. What ended his run in December 1993 was not a communications intercept or a satellite image. It was a phone call to his son. He knew the risk. He made the call anyway. The Colombian search teams traced the signal to a middle-class neighborhood in Medellin. The operation concluded on the rooftops outside the house where he was hiding. The vulnerability was not the phone. The vulnerability was the relationship. The need to maintain a connection with someone he loved, even when that connection created the opening that ended everything. Osama bin Laden. And he evaded capture for nearly a decade after September 2001, one of the most intensive manhunts in the history of American intelligence. The compound in Abbottabad, Pakistan, where he was ultimately located, had no internet connection, no phone lines, no electronic communications of any kind. The CIA spent years trying to identify who was living there. What finally broke the case was tracking a trusted courier, a man who carried physical messages between bin Laden and the outside world. Yeah, that courier was identified, his movements monitored, his vehicle followed on the roads outside the compound. The human connection was the only thread available, and it was enough. El Chapo's meeting with actor Sean Penn and Mexican actress Kate del Castillo, coordinated through months of communication as El Chapo sought to have his story told, was described by Mexico's Attorney General Arely Gomez as an essential element in the operation that led to his recapture. And he had survived years as a fugitive through tunnels, bribery, and an intimate knowledge of the Sierra Madre Mountains. What he could not survive was the desire to be known, to have his story told, to allow people into his circle who carried devices and communications that, regardless of the precautions El Chapo himself took, produced the metadata trail that directed authorities to his location. The vulnerability was not the journalist. It was the trust placed in the relationship. To now place El Mencho inside that same pattern. No phone, no internet, physical couriers only. Nearly 400 armed personnel. A security apparatus modeled on military special forces. Constant movement between mountain safe houses. A circle reduced, through 10 years of law enforcement pressure, to its absolute minimum. And yet, one personal connection remained. A woman who had spent years moving through those mountains alongside him. a woman whose properties in Zapopan and Puerto Vallarta were under military surveillance, a woman whose trusted driver had been identified and was being quietly tracked by Mexican military intelligence. El Mencho had built the most sophisticated personal security operation of any fugitive in Mexican history. And the single thread that unraveled it was not a technology failure. It was the oldest vulnerability in the history of people who run from power. He needed connection. He allowed someone in. And in the mountains of Jalisco, on a Saturday morning when her vehicle pulled through the gates of the Tapalpa Country Club, that single concession to human connection became the only opening 10 years of intelligence work could not otherwise produce. Ask yourself this honestly. If you had spent 10 years being hunted by two governments, if you had watched your son imprisoned, your wife arrested, your brothers extradited one by one, would you have let anyone in at all? And if the answer is no, then you understand exactly why the intelligence professionals who finally located El Mencho described the operation not as a triumph of surveillance technology, but as a lesson in the irreducible human cost of trust. No amount of operational discipline can fully protect against the need to allow someone close. And that gap, that irreducible human gap, is where every fugitive is ultimately found. El Mencho is gone, but the organization he built across 15 years is not. That distinction matters more than almost anything else that can be said about what happened in Tapalpa on February 22nd, 2026. Because the instinct, after an operation of this magnitude, after a manhunt of this duration, is to treat the death of a founding leader as the end of the story. It never is. The urgent question for security analysts is not whether the CJNG will survive, and it is what form its survival will take. El Mencho had been suffering from kidney disease and needed to rest regularly after dialysis treatments. So he had created a council of commanders to delegate many of the cartel's important leadership functions. That delegation, born out of medical necessity, may now be the single structural feature that keeps the organization operational through the transition that follows his death. He did not intend to build a succession plan. He built one by necessity, and it is already in motion. Mexico City-based security consultant David Saucedo stated that it was likely that one of 4 or 5 top commanders will emerge as the next leader, naming Ricardo Ruiz Velasco, known as El Doble R, Audias Flores Silva, known as El Jardinero, Hugo Gonzalo Mendoza Gaitan, known as El Sapo, and a fourth figure, El Mencho's former head of security, about whom very little is publicly known. The Security Minister Omar Garcia Harfuch confirmed that authorities have identified the 4 strongest leaders within the organization, and that 2 of those 4 are considered most likely to succeed El Mencho, both currently under active investigation. El Mencho's stepson, Juan Carlos Valencia Gonzalez, alias El Chero Tres, could be a logical successor. His mother, Rosalinda Gonzalez Valencia, played a major role in the CJNG's main financial operations prior to her capture. But many within the organization see him as too young and without the necessary knowledge or experience to command the loyalty of senior regional commanders who have operated semi-independently for years. Family lineage in an organization of this complexity does not guarantee command authority. It provides symbolic legitimacy. Whether that is enough is precisely the question that will define the next chapter of the CJNG's existence. David Mora, an expert at the Crisis Group Analysis Center, I noted that in the absence of a direct succession, a power vacuum is created that opens the door to violent realignments within the organization. It was the weakening of the Sinaloa cartel, analysts note, that created the space for the CJNG's rapid rise in the first place. History does not always move in the direction that successful operations intend. Oseguera was buried in Zapopan following an elaborate funeral ceremony on March 3, 2026, interred in a golden casket. So the formal identification of his remains was conducted through fingerprint analysis and biometric forensic methods at FMDO facilities in Mexico City, following transport of his body by military aircraft on February 22nd. The process was documented according to legal procedure. The identification was confirmed. The manhunt was officially closed, and Guadalupe Moreno Carrillo, the woman who visited him on Saturday, whose trusted driver intelligence agencies had been tracking, whose departure from that mountain compound set a 24-hour operational clock in motion, remains completely absent from public record. No confirmed location, no official statement from either government, no photograph published by any outlet. She exists now only as the confirmed thread that connected 10 years of intelligence work to a single Saturday morning in the mountains of Jalisco. Whether she cooperated deliberately for money, for protection, or for reasons that only she understands, or whether she was tracked entirely without her knowledge through surveillance she never detected, is a question that the governments who ran this operation know the answer to. They have chosen not to say. And that silence, sustained and deliberate, is itself the final piece of evidence this case leaves behind. What it tells us is this: no amount of operational security, however extraordinary, can fully eliminate the human vulnerability that connection creates. El Mencho survived electronic surveillance, financial tracking, the systematic dismantlement of his entire family network, and over a decade of coordinated pressure from two of the most resourced intelligence apparatuses on Earth. What he could not survive was trusting one person, allowing one human connection to know where he would be on a Saturday morning in February. That is not a failure of his operational discipline, and it is a description of what it means to be human. Even the most hunted man in Mexico needed someone. And in the end, that need was the only thing that mattered. Drop your theory in the comments. Did she cooperate deliberately? Was she tracked without her knowledge? And what do you think happens to the CJNG now? Does it hold together? Or does it fracture into something harder to confront than what came before? This community asks the hard questions. See, if this investigation gave you a deeper understanding of how modern intelligence operations actually work, subscribe to the Case Files Collective, hit that notification bell, and stay with us. Every week, we follow the evidence. We examine the methodology, and we never stop asking the questions that the headlines leave unanswered. The investigation continues.